First of all, I want to say that I would be much more in favor of talking about something pleasant. But it's urgently important that we understand that our system of healthcare has been corrupted, and we need to know how to protect ourselves, first of all, and we need to know the kind of decisions, as John said, that we need to make for ourselves to protect our lives and for our loved ones. So I graduated from nursing school way back in 1969. It seems a really short time ago, but at that time, everybody who entered a medical profession understood that it was a really bad thing and unthinkable to kill a human being. Now, doctors are practicing veterinary medicine on human beings in many instances. And I think that kind of sums up what John said. We don't kill people. We're special. We're made in the image of God. Okay? So there's a dignity that we have. There's a sanctity of life that needs to be recognized when it comes to human beings that doesn't apply to any other species. In 2012, a group of people, pro-life organizations and medical professionals, got together in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and started a new group called the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance. We realized that something needed to be done, and done now, to start to reverse the trend, to renew respect for human life in healthcare. And at that meeting, we decided that our two main goals were going to be, first, to restore reverence for human life in healthcare, and that means to protect patients. The second thing we were going to try to do was to protect the conscience rights of healthcare providers, because no healthcare provider should be punished either professionally or financially or legally for protecting the life of his or her patients. But we are seeing that happening all over wherever assisted suicide and euthanasia have been legalized. We are also seeing nurses and doctors being forced to starve and dehydrate patients to death. Because in every one of our states, euthanasia, by withholding life-sustaining treatment, that is treatment that will keep a person alive, that is happening in every state in our country. Euthanasia by omission is legal in every state. California has a really bad law. It is so open-ended, your advance directive law, that anybody could be killed under it. Okay, so our patient advocates at the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance answer the phone all the time, and the majority of our calls are no longer about abortion, even though they used to be about abortion, because we're a program of Human Life Alliance. And Human Life Alliance, the office is where most of our phone calls are answered, although I get a lot of them in Texas too. But what we're seeing is that fewer and fewer calls are about abortion nowadays, and more of them are about the way that loved ones are being taken care of or not taken care of in hospice. Many patients are being terminally sedated. That means they're being permanently made unconscious by the use of drugs and starved and dehydrated to death. This is called stealth euthanasia if the family is not aware of what's going on. Sometimes patients request this. When they request it, we call it VSED. That's voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. And that is very much a practice that's going on in modern day hospice. People check themselves into hospice, stop eating and drinking, get sedated, and die after a period of time, depending on how healthy they were. They die of dehydration and starvation while being sedated, supposedly kept comfortable. But I'm not sure that even when you're sedated, you don't feel the effects of starvation and dehydration. We listen to these people who call because their loved one's life is in immediate jeopardy. And if they don't get them out of that situation quickly, the person will be dead. And sometimes they don't realize what's going on until the patient is really close to death. And they realize that they're giving them too many medications they never needed before they entered hospice. They're not in pain. Why are they giving them opioids? They're not restless. Why are they giving them sedatives? And they certainly still need food and fluids as long as their body can assimilate them. So we listen to these people. We try to give them what advice we can on how to protect their loved one. And we get them referred to the legal resources or the medical people that they need to talk to or that they need help from in order to save their loved ones. And so the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance has a real niche to fill that I don't think has ever been filled before. And if any of you are interested in joining the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance, please talk to me afterwards. What happens to those patients, though, who are being denied life-sustaining treatment in any facility, whether it's a nursing home or a hospital or a hospice? What happens to them if their family cannot find a healthcare facility that will accept them and give them care? And that happens all of the time. It's almost impossible to find places that will take these patients, especially if they're on a ventilator or they need a trach or something. So there was a case last year in California, and maybe you're aware of Israel Stinson. He was a 2-year-old little boy who, from Vacaville, California, I hope I'm pronouncing the town correctly, who fell into a coma last April in 2016. He was hospitalized with an asthma attack, and he ended up in a coma due to a series of the fact that probably he did not receive the treatment that he needed in the first place. He was declared brain dead. This happened at Kaiser Permanente Hospital or Medical Center in Roseville. And they wanted to remove his life support, but his parents said no. So they got a hold of Life Legal Defense Foundation, and the lawyers there went to bat for them. And after going through the courts sided with the hospital against the parents. So the parents had to find a new place to take Israel. They got us involved. They got other pro-life groups involved. We tried. We called every hospital we could think of in the United States, and not one of them could. Some of them were equipped for Israel, but most of them just would not take him because he was declared brain dead here in California. But finally we found a hospital in Guatemala that would take him. So we airlifted him to Guatemala, where he spent several months there under the care of some exceptional doctors in Guatemala. Remember, this is not a first world country, and they're providing better care for little 2-year-old Israel Stinson than he got in the United States. Okay, so little Israel they said, no, he's not brain dead. His EEG shows that he's not brain dead. They treated him. They gave him what he needed. They gave him a trach. They put him on a vent. They took care of him, and he got better, well enough to go home. But because in California he was declared brain dead, they couldn't get him any insurance, and so he couldn't get home health care. His insurance had been canceled. When you're declared dead, you're no longer insurable. So the parents couldn't bring him home because they couldn't have home health care. Even though he had all the medical equipment that he needed, they needed home health care. Well, finally, a great doctor, Paul Byrne, found him a place at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. But in that hospital, as soon as we got him transferred there, they decided to take him off life support. The parents went to court again with Life Legal Defense, and the court gave them a stay so that they could look for another place for Israel. But the hospital went to the same judge and got the stay reversed. And the parents begged the hospital to just give them a little more time so the family could get there to say goodbye to Israel, and they did not give them that time. So, Israel died on August 25th, 2016. And the question remains, why did Children's Hospital agree to care for him and then kill him? This heartbreaking case was the straw that broke the camel's back. It convinced us that we had to do more than just support pro-life healthcare and pro-life doctors. We had to create pro-life healthcare facilities. So we started a program called Safe Haven Project. Safe Haven means a state-of-the-art pro-life medical facility staffed and equipped to provide competent and compassionate care for patients who want life-sustaining treatment, but are denied such treatment at other medical facilities. So if you're interested in being part of the Safe Havens Project, we are looking for a property or a building that we can use to make into this medical facility, or facilities that are already available that are doing this kind of work already, if you know of any. Places that would accept these kinds of patients and keep them alive. You know, John talked a little bit about medical ethics. Well, medical ethics, traditional medical ethics, is based on the Hippocratic Oath and Christian principles. We respect the sanctity of human life. But bioethics, which emerged in the 1960s, has become a secular field. It's post-Christian. Really, it's anti-Christian. The philosophical and theological roots of medical ethics have been abandoned. And the core principle of modern bioethics, or post-Christian bioethics, is quality of life. And John explained that pretty well. But if you want to know what I really think, I think that post-Christian bioethics is exquisitely demonic. Listen to what Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, who's the future architect of Obamacare, what he wrote in 1993 in the American Journal of Medicine. Increasingly, it will be our collective determination as to what lives are worth living that will decide how incompetent patients are treated. We need to begin to articulate and justify these collective determinations. That was the architect of Obamacare. You see why we need to have Obamacare repealed. Secular bioethicists and doctors like Dr. Emanuel wield tremendous influence in our healthcare system today. Christian doctors and nurses and those who value traditional medical ethics don't hold much sway. As John mentioned, Justice Neil Gorsuch, in his book, he described exactly what bioethics, post-Christian bioethics, are. He said, "It is the physician's assessment of the patient's quality of life as degrading or deteriorating or hopeless that stands as the ultimate justification for killing." Many healthcare providers assume that severe disability renders a person's life not worth living. That's why my organization is called Life is Worth Living. We are trying to counter the idea that anybody's life is not worth living. Everyone's life is worth living. No matter what your mental or your physical condition is or your age, we are all part of the same human family, and we cannot treat certain human beings the way that we treat our pets. Doctors who believe that way give less care, less aggressive treatment, and less time to the patients that they consider to have lives not worth living or not worth the cost of caring for them. They greatly influence patient and family decisions by the way that they phrase their medical choices that they give to patients. For instance, what if a doctor came into your room and you're sick and he says, "Do you want us to give you comfort care?" And you say, "Of course." What he's really saying to you is, "Do you want us to abandon all active treatment and just provide comfort care?" How many people realize that? Euthanasia, as John said, is an action, but it also can be done by omission. Many people, like little baby Stinson, Israel, are killed by denial of treatment. I want to talk to you a little bit about advance directives for healthcare. These are legal documents by which you make your wishes known about medical treatment, or you appoint an agent to make decisions for you. After numerous attempts to legalize euthanasia by some other method, the Euthanasia Society of America back in 1967 introduced the living will, which was the first advance directive, as a first step toward social and legal acceptance of euthanasia. And guess what happened? In 1990, the federal government got on the bandwagon and passed a law called the Patient Self-Determination Act. Now, every time you enter a hospital, they will ask you if you have an advance directive. Don't sign it. I'll tell you what to do later. Just don't sign the documents that they give you in the hospital. From that first step, it only took 23 years. The first step where the Euthanasia Society of America introduced the living will. The next year, California passed its California Natural Death Act, the first living will law to pass in the nation. Then the PSDA, the Patient Self-Determination Act, came along 23 years later. The California Healthcare Decisions Act, as it's now called, it's no longer the California Natural Death Act, defines an advance directive as either an individual healthcare instruction, that is a living will, or a power of attorney for healthcare. In the individual instruction, you can say anything you want to. Okay, your will is supposed to supersede what the doctor thinks is best for you. Okay? But that's not always the way it works. If you want to die, your will takes precedence. If you want to live, the doctor's wishes may take precedence. Okay? So it all depends on whether you're asking for treatment or whether you're saying, "Let me die," how you're going to be treated or who's going to make your decisions for you. In Texas, we have a terrible law. It's part of our Texas Advance Directives Act, and it is a futile care measure or a medical futility measure. And that law is the worst medical futility law in the nation. Once a doctor decides that he doesn't want to provide a patient with treatment that the patient or the patient's family wants to give or wants the patient to receive, then the doctor will take it to the ethics committee. Remember, this is treatment that is keeping the patient alive. Okay? And the family wants it to continue, the patient wants it to continue. It's taken to the hospital ethics committee, which is a committee where all the members are appointed by the hospital. So they have a vested interest in protecting the hospital and siding with the hospital and cutting the hospital's costs. It's not an impartial jury or judge. These were invented in the 1980s, ethics committees, hospital ethics committees, to avoid taking these cases to court. The problem in Texas, there's no appeal for people once they get a medical futility decision against them. They've got 10 days to either get transferred out of that hospital or they stop all treatment. And believe me, I've sat in on these ethics committee meetings with patients. The last one that I did, it was a 26-year-old woman with MS. She had been in a rehab hospital, and she had gotten dehydrated somehow, probably because they didn't feed her, because she had a hard time feeding herself. She fainted and hit her head and had a stroke. She ended up in Harris Methodist Hospital in Fort Worth. And after a couple of weeks of treatment there, the doctor decided it wasn't worth treating her anymore and sent the case to the ethics committee because her mother disagreed. Well, in the packet of information that the ethics committee is required to give the family before they have the ethics committee meeting, there's one sheet of paper on which are listed the people who will help them find a place to transfer their loved one if the hospital has a fetal care decision against their loved one. And I'm on that. And so is a couple of people, John Segal and a couple of other patient advocates in the state of Texas. Not many people are on it. And they call us desperate, can't believe that this is happening to them or to their loved one. And we go to the ethics committee with them. And at this particular one, we brought a young lady, Emily Cook, who's a new attorney. She sat in, this was her first ethics committee meeting. She sat in on it, and she made all of the difference because she pointed out to the ethics committee, you're not even pointing the law. You could be sued for the way you're handling this case. The girl, we've got her transferred. But she would have been dead had we not had an attorney in that room who knew the law. I don't hold much sway as a patient advocate. I can go in there and offer support to the family and help them find a place, but I can't stop them. I can't say you're breaking the law, we're going to sue you. Okay, so when you fill out an advance directive here in Texas, you can check boxes that say, that direct the provision, withholding, or withdrawal of artificial nutrition and hydration and all other forms of health care. And you can check a box that says, I do not want my life prolonged. That means you don't want your life sustained. You don't want to live any longer. If I have an incurable or irreversible condition that will result in my death within a relatively short time. What is a relatively short time? It doesn't even say 6 months, like John mentioned. It just says a relatively short time. If I become unconscious and to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, I will not regain consciousness. Jennifer Hammond over there is a perfect example of someone who regained consciousness after she'd had a diagnosis or a prognosis that she would never regain consciousness. The third reason, if the likely risks and burdens of treatment would outweigh the expected benefits. Who decides if it outweighs the expected benefits? If a doctor wants you dead, you will be dead if you sign one of those especially. Numerous documented recoveries after medical pronouncements that the patient is terminally ill or permanently unconscious or for whatever reason they want to end your life are proof that we should never make this decision. We should never make statements that say, I'd rather be dead than. Dr. Fernando Mariachi, a medical director of the emergency department in Erie, Pennsylvania, was called into a hospital room by a frantic medical staff. They did not know what a living will was. They didn't know how to interpret a living will. And so the patient was in cardiac arrest. Because he had a living will, everyone was standing around frozen, saying, we're not supposed to treat the patient. Dr. Mariachi shocked the patient with a defibrillator. The man survived, and he noted, Dr. Mariachi noted, there are times where we have seconds to minutes to act. In those instances, when a document gets misinterpreted, someone dies. It's never wise to specify that you'd rather be dead. In 2005, I was involved in a Wisconsin case, and it was a young man who'd been hit by a roadside bomb in Iraq. His name was Staff Sergeant Chad Simons. He came back to the United States. He was in rehab. His family tells me he was doing pretty well. He was, when he'd squeeze a ball in therapy, if he dropped it, he'd bend over, he'd pick it up for himself. His best friend said he was speaking to him. He was saying yes and no to his questions, and he wanted to live. And yet he had signed a living will before going to Iraq saying no feeding tube. He died. They admitted him to, his wife admitted him to a hospice where he was starved and dehydrated to death. His family called me in the midst of this and says, what can we do to save him? There was not a thing we could do because he had a living will. Choose a directive that's not a license to kill you. Choose a power of attorney for healthcare where you appoint someone that you trust to make medical decisions for you. And not just any one, but one that will protect your life. The one that I suggest is put out by the Patients' Rights Council. And on page 3 of our magazine there, you will see some information, so I'm not going to go into it. But there's one thing you need to know about the particular document, the Protective Medical Decisions document that I'm going to recommend, and that is that it prohibits your agent from approving the intentional ending of your life. And this protects not only you, but it protects your agent from being pressured into making these kinds of decisions. It also says that the meaning of the words used in this document are the meaning of the words that I have discussed with my agent, and my agent's interpretation is what you will follow. And this is important because the physician responsible for your care in a hospital is often a stranger who may misinterpret your meaning. Advance directives, remember, are created by lawyers and lawmakers, and they're followed by doctors who receive little training in how to interpret them or how to follow them. I also have given you some principles for making medical decisions. I suggest you discuss these principles with your agent so that they are on the same page with you. These are ways in which to make decisions that respect life and that are medically appropriate. You don't have to accept every treatment, but you have to know the difference between the intention to kill someone or to have yourself killed and the intention just to do what is medically appropriate. These principles are really easy to understand, so I'm not going to go over them with you, but they are good guidelines for discussions with your agent, and I suggest you keep them with your advance directive, with your protective medical decisions document, so that when you go into the hospital, the doctors know what you mean by what you say. I talked to you a little bit about medical futility, but even in the states where there are no laws, hospitals still have medical futility policies, okay? So you have to be aware of this. Many people are not aware that this threat is lurking in their hospital. We have, one member of the PHA is Mary Kellett. Her little boy was killed in a hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a hospital that had a secret medical futility policy. So we need to be aware of these threats. Another threat we need to know about is POLST, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Its name and its acronym are different in different states. In Texas, it's called MOST, Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. So every state has some version of POLST. In California, it's called the California POLST. It's a one-page, two-sided form, and it's on ultra pink paper, so you can't miss it. It goes into your medical file and stays there. It travels with you from one place to another. It reduces complicated medical decisions to check-the-box format. I copied one off of your California Post website, and this is your state form. Here are the choices you can make: full treatment, selective treatment, or comfort-focused treatment. You can refuse artificially administered nutrition and hydration. But you know what's really bad about this? Is that this goes into effect immediately. And it doesn't matter whether you're competent or not. And it is signed by a doctor. No other advance directive is signed by a doctor. There are no witnesses or notarization required for this. So the person who asks you these questions is usually a clinician, someone in the healthcare field. They bring this into your room when you're in the hospital or in the doctor's office, because last year, talking about these things with every patient who goes to a doctor's office became a medically covered medical service under Medicare. So when you go to your doctor's office now, they're going to ask you, do you have an advance directive? Let's talk about this document. If you go into a hospital, somebody's going to come into your room and they're going to say, even though this is only supposed to be people who are expected not to live for more than a year, actually it's being used with just about everybody nowadays. And the questions will be asked. Somebody else will check the little boxes. Are they interpreting your wishes correctly? Are they even giving you the information you need to make good decisions? And why would you want to check these little boxes and tell them what you do and don't want? People don't realize that even if they're competent, this is in effect. So beware. When you, it's always voluntary to complete a post form, always. It's supposed to be anyway. Some nursing homes I've heard in Texas and in California have told patients in nursing homes that they all have to have a post form, but they don't. Your law says they don't. Your law says it's voluntary. Once completed and signed by a healthcare professional, these become medical orders that travel with the patient. And what that means is, say you signed this or you filled this out in hospital A. You go home, it's stuck on your refrigerator in case some medical emergency happens. The EMTs have to follow it. You get admitted to the hospital after having a stroke. You can't communicate, and you're in a different hospital, say hospital B. And at hospital B, the doctor wants to start some IVs, but he can't because you got this pulse from this other doctor signed in hospital A. Now that is a unique circumstance. In no other circumstance does one doctor have to follow another doctor's orders, but under POLST, they do. So this even offends doctors' conscience rights. So John also talked about physician-assisted suicide. I want to say just a couple of things about assisted suicide. It is now legal in 6 jurisdictions in the United States. Most recently, Washington, D.C. was added to the list. In Canada, the whole country of Canada now has legalized assisted suicide and euthanasia. Thankfully, thus far in 2017, every effort that Compassion and Choices, the former Hemlock Society, but the leading organization promoting assisted suicide, every state in which they've tried to pass legislation in 2017 has not passed it. It has failed. So at least we're making some headway by stopping these laws. Be aware that the ultimate goal of Compassion and Choices is to make assisted suicide into a legal covered medical treatment in every state. And what kind of choice does Compassion and Choices promote? My brother Don broke his neck in a diving accident, and he was a quadriplegic for the last 11 years of his life. But for the first year and a half, he wanted to die. He even tried to commit suicide. Took his power chair and got himself out in 30-degree below zero weather in Minnesota in the middle of the winter. Stayed out there until his head got too cold and he couldn't stand it anymore and came back in. Okay, what if there'd been a doctor who was willing to give him assisted suicide? Don would have been dead. But you know, the last 9 years of my brother's life, he became a genuine human being. He made more friends. He did more good things in the last 9 years of his life than he did in the first 29 years of his life. We never know what the future has in store for us. If we have 10 more minutes of life, God has something for those 10 minutes or he wouldn't have given them to us. Why cut it short? Suicide is not socially desirable. So why do states promote it? Assisted suicide legislation hurts both the patient and the doctor. Assisted suicide was legalized in Vermont in 2013. The Alliance Defending Freedom filed a suit against state officials who interpret the law to force healthcare providers to tell people about the benefits of assisted suicide. So they went to court to defend the conscience rights of healthcare providers, and their suit was dismissed. So now they're trying to find other ways to protect the conscientious objectors in medicine. So doctors' conscience rights are being violated. And then as far as patients go, Dr. Brian McAllister, I'm just going to read you his report. He's a physician practicing in Reno, Nevada. Nevada does not have assisted suicide. Here's what he said. During the summer of 2016, I worked with 2 different patients who I felt would benefit from bone marrow transplants for their cancers. Since we no longer perform this procedure here in Reno, the patients would have to go to a center in Northern California or Oregon to receive treatment. When I spoke with the medical directors of the patients' insurance companies by telephone on separate occasions, both of them said they would cover hospice or assisted suicide, but they would not approve the bone marrow transplants. It is now my experience, writes the doctor, and opinion that since assisted suicide became legal in California and Oregon, the practice of medicine across the West has been irreparably harmed for patients who still want their diseases treated, but are now offered the cheaper option of a quick death. In conclusion, I would just like to say, the doctors always took an oath, the Hippocratic Oath, before recent decades, and in there they promised to do no harm. Those are 3 simple words. But devotion to those 3 simple words or disregard of those 3 simple words makes all the difference between a doctor you can trust with your life and a doctor you should run from for your life. The PHA was founded based on the belief that there's still time to renew reverence for life within healthcare if we act swiftly and diligently. It's imperative that we proclaim in word and deed reverence for human life. We must be brutal in our opposition to medical killing, but gentle with people. Our mission is not so much to defeat our foes as it is to convert them, to show them a better way. And now I just want to express what a great privilege it is to be here with Jennifer Hammond, whose personal story, while really frightening, is also filled with hope. I didn't address the controversies surrounding a diagnosis of irreversible coma and brain death, as well as the serious concerns that we have about organ procurement practices, especially the pressure to donate organs that is brought to bear on families of brain-damaged patients. I'm confident that Jennifer's story will give you a new perspective and will make you want to explore these issues more deeply.